The first time Trump won, beating Hillary Clinton and becoming the president of America back in 2016, many people in the international community thought, oh my God, I can't believe this is the guy who'll have the keys to a massive nuclear arsenal and the world's most widely dispersed military. This time around, so many people seem to be saying, better him than Kamala, or at bare minimum, it doesn't make a difference either way. The first time he won, I remember, at least to a certain degree, asking the question, what's wrong with the average American voter? But this time around, I'm asking, how messed up is the American system that people need someone like Trump to address their issues? Now, I do want to preface the rest of what I'm going to say with acknowledging a lot of the optimism for Trump, at least the small amount of optimism he had over the Democratic Party, has been lost or is quickly drying up as he begins replacing his old neocon-filled cabinet with new neocons, which either speaks to his disingenuous nature or incompetence. I don't know, but I still want to explain why, at least from the onset, so many people internationally, even on the left, felt a little bit more drawn towards Trump than Harris in many cases, even if they're both terrible candidates. So, from the perspective of someone who's concerned about the Global South, who lives in the Global South, who has family in multiple Global South countries, I look at the destructive wars of all the presidents before Trump, regardless of side, and then I compare it up against his record, even considering, or perhaps especially considering, he was surrounded by neocons the whole time, and suddenly I start to ask, maybe Trump wasn't that bad, especially when you consider what someone with Hillary's record could have brought us. And now I look at how the Russia-Ukraine war broke out under the Harris-Biden government, and I just look at the general state of the world, and I begin to appreciate the Trump years just a little bit more. And when I see Trump speaking differently about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, saying the complete opposite of other people who are literally saying out loud they're willing to let Ukrainians fight to their last man if need be, suddenly, in this instance, he starts to sound like the most reasonable man in the room, as difficult as that may seem. Now, of course, I do hear people saying that the situation in Gaza will get worse under Trump because he's even more of an Israel supporter. And then I think, hold on a second. Not only did this start under the Democrats, but it's also already continually got worse anyway. And every single university in Gaza has been destroyed. Every single hospital has been destroyed or damaged. Entire neighborhoods have been flattened. Entire families have been erased. Doesn't that make the worst case scenario still continually getting worse the status quo anyway? I also hear that Netanyahu will be able to do whatever he wants under Trump. Hasn't that already been the case anyway? The U.S. State Department press conferences often sound like a PR meeting for Israel, excusing or minimizing their atrocities. And even when Biden's supposed consequence-worthy red lines were crossed after Israel launched an invasion into Rafah, what happened? Were there consequences like they promised? No, nothing happened. They can literally already do whatever they want as it is. So knowing this, how could anyone reward or hope that the Democrats would be rewarded with votes despite the blood on their hands just because the worst case scenario is that the other guy might be just as bad? At the end of the day, more Muslim voters showed up for Trump than they did Harris. Of course, even more showed up for Jill Stein, but even they knew full well that this at most would benefit Trump. So Muslim voters understood they couldn't reward the Democrats for what they did and what they continue to do, even if it meant a Trump victory. So even they seem willing to take their chances by shaking things up rather than voting for the absolute certainty of status quo. I had a conversation with an American guy, an expat here in China, a young guy in his early 20s, very smart guy, highly politically active, and very much on the left. But despite that, he isn't too bothered by Trump's win. From his perspective, no matter what party you vote for, nothing really changes, especially with foreign policy. He says it's like endlessly doing donuts in a parking lot. But Trump, he's unlike any other candidate. He comes from outside the political system, and he's openly unhinged. His flaws are out in the open for everyone to see, which has an advantage that I'll in one scenario, which I'll get to later. But will he fix the system? Maybe there's a chance. Personally, I think it's possible, but unlikely. Will he break the system? That's more likely. But with every other candidate thus far, the only thing we can be sure of is that they'd preserve the pre-existing systems. And people want something different. I often repeat a quote I heard by Eric Lee in China. He says, in China, you can't change the party, but you can change the policies. In America, you can change the party, but you can't change the policies. And when you zoom out, I mean, for quite a while, America long has kind of seemed like a one-party system with two brand names. And with how many neocons have defected or denounced Trump, even if, granted, he still has plenty of hopeful neocons surrounding him, of course, at least listening to his rhetoric and matching it up to his first term, when you do that, he does seem very different from everyone else, particularly when it comes to his views on America's endless war-making machine. So will Trump finally be the person who manages to change the course of America? I don't know, but again, he does seem to be erratic enough to at least shake things up. Perhaps he won't be the guy who fixes the system. Maybe he'll be the guy who totally breaks it and gives a chance for someone else to build something better in its place. Or maybe he'll just totally destroy America beyond repair. I don't know. But the status quo and the decline of America has gotten so bad that people are willing to take a chance on this erratic man with massive character flaws. If America gets worse under Trump before it gets better, as long as he isn't derailed by pro-war neocons on his team, that might end up being a net positive for victims of their neocolonialism in the global South. They may see benefits more so than Americans themselves, at least in the short term. But I mean, I'm more concerned with the condition of 95% of the global population than I am the 5% in America, if I'm being honest. And I know there's many empathetic Americans who also think this way, even if they know it has implications for themselves. But that's what it's gotten to. Even people on the far left who have realized their voices, their protests, their demands, their attempts to rise up have gone unanswered for so long that the wrench they're now willing to throw into the system is Trump. I mean, Trump doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to unify the country anytime soon. What's more likely in the short term is an ironic balkanization of America. Ironic because it's much like the kind they rely on or instigate overseas to weaken other countries. So can a weakened and divided America still preserve their hegemonic rule over our world? It starts to become a little bit more difficult. Suddenly the global South and even America's own allies have a better chance at true sovereignty. Even before Trump's win, political figures in Japan came out to say that if Trump won, Japan might finally need to and will be able to take control of their own foreign policy. Trump's team has strong words for Europe as well, suggesting that they're going to have to start thinking about taking over their own security. And if Europe wasn't so dependent on America for their military security, would they still humiliate themselves by completely subjugating their countries to America? Would they perhaps have not let the revelation that America was spying on their own leaders slide if they didn't owe America as much? Would they have allowed America's hostile takeover of France's prized energy company, Alstom, while the U.S. government held one of their executives hostage? Would they feel less obligated to follow America into their wars of aggression without having any military infrastructure dependent on them? Maybe. But America does actually gain a lot of its strength, power, and wealth by subjugating the rest of the planet. They've been able to shape the world according to its own corporate interests. As an example, through their institutions, they've been able to demand that countries like Indonesia abandon their burgeoning aviation industry that would have competed with American companies. They've been able to require that African nations abandon food security programs and make them more reliant on imports and produce from the West, which in one case directly led to famine. And throughout its history, America has regularly deployed the military to protect corporate interests overseas. I mean, the United Fruit Company being only one of the earlier, more famous examples of that, but far from the only one, of course. So Trump is more isolationist than the other candidates. He might not understand the implications of isolationism and the implications it would have for America, nor perhaps does he understand the true reasons why their country is actually able to consume something like 25% of the world's resources despite only having 5% of the population. Or maybe he does understand, and he sees that there's no way to stop the rise of a multipolar world, which has largely been incentivized by America's bad behavior and poor custodianship of power. Perhaps he knows that America is faced with two choices now: continue to rely on neocolonialism for their wealth until their power is totally diminished, or try to reinvent themselves now while they still have some power, influence, and wealth remaining. Again, maybe he'll change nothing, but he still appears to be the person who might actually have a chance to change something. When Harris, in contrast, was asked what she would do differently or change compared to Biden's term, she couldn't come up with anything. And meanwhile, Trump is saying what he would do differently even compared to his own first term. and how he got derailed by his poor choices when building his team. Granted, he seems to be making a lot of the same mistakes again. But even if he does get derailed by new neocons this time around, he's so remarkably transparent for someone who pathologically lies about the silliest things. I mean, I remember when Assad once said something to the effect of Trump being the best American president their adversaries could ever hope for. He says, for example, exactly why they're occupying Syria. He's not like these other Nobel Peace Prize winning presidents who go on to bomb weddings and civilians all over our planet while being celebrated. In regards to the Syria comment, he's of course referring to when Trump said very clearly on multiple occasions that the only reason he's keeping some troops in Syria is for the oil and because he likes oil. At the end of the day, I don't know, this is just a personal opinion. I think it's unlikely for Trump to turn into a full pro-war neocon, even if he surrounds himself with some unfortunate characters. But even if he does, it will be hard to recover from him telling the whole world the way it really is. I mean, he's going to make it really difficult, and he did make it really difficult for any subsequent administration to retell the creative stories behind why they're actually occupying foreign lands. And that is something I did appreciate about his first term. Up until that point, so many American administrations, particularly the Democrats, were really good at pretending to be someone they were not and pretending to be more virtuous than they really were. They were good at constructing false pretenses upon which they used to claim moral high ground and to penalize other nations with. Trump isn't good at that. His honesty actually helps to undermine American propaganda directed at convincing global South populations that America is there to help them rather than to subjugate them. Our entire world is ready for something different, Americans included, even if that means getting someone to first break the pre-existing systems that have been impossible to escape. If America had a sane, inspiring, intellectually and morally honest leader or candidates who had the actual intention to start on a brand new path, Donald Trump would have never been needed, and the idea of him being president would have still been a joke. But alas, here we are, and this is the state of our world, the state of the American empire. And the state of America at home is just so atrocious that people are just saying, maybe we should just see what happens when we put this disturbed and flawed individual in charge. I mean, that's how desperate the situation has got for some people. And that's how we've arrived at this point in time. I guess, the only thing to do from here now is to cross our fingers and wait and see where he takes us. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
And then they say he left troops in Syria. You know what I did? I left troops to take the oil. I took the oil. The only troops I have are taking the oil. Right now, the United States has the oil. So they say he left troops in Syria. No, I got rid of all of them other than we're protecting the oil. We have the oil.
We've kept the oil. We stayed back and kept the oil. Other people can patrol the border of Syria, frankly, and Turkey, they've been fighting for 1,000 years. Let them do the border. We don't want to do that. We want to bring our soldiers home. But we did leave soldiers because we're keeping the oil. I like oil. We're keeping the oil.
It seems that the United States is staying to protect the oil. And at least President Trump is honest to say what the United States intends to do.